The chest is an often overlooked area of the body when it comes to massage, but I guarantee you that if you've got neck, upper back and shoulder stuff going on, that your chest is also probably carrying around a lot of extra tension and could really benefit from a little bit of time here in the techniques that I'm about to show you. These are the techniques, by the way, that you would learn if you came to a Navina training. Start above your client's head with your knees open so that you can get nice and close so that you don't have to reach too far. We call this an open diamond position. Then we're going to start with a little bit of a landmarking touch on the chest. We're working just beneath the clavicle, just beneath the collarbone or inferior to it using our anatomical language, and start at around the delta pectoral groove. So at the point where the chest and the shoulder sort of meet and there's a little bit of an indentation there. And I like to make the first few touches just reasonably brief and a little bit lighter in order to both get a read of the area and see what's happening here, and also to give your client a little bit of time to get used to touch on the chest. By the way, we go from one side to the other here, alternating our pressure instead of doing both sides at the same time, so that our client can still breathe fluidly and we are not restricting breath as much as if it were both sides at the same time. After you've done this from one side to the other a few times, we're going to create a longer pause. So start to get your hand in the right spot being a spot that you've identified as needing a little bit more attention in these first few touches, and sink in gradually and pause. And then we're going to gradually transition to the other side, the corresponding point on the other side. So position your hand accordingly. Remember, we're just inferior to the collarbone. Settle in with your pressure nice and gradually, and pause there for even more breaths. And on this side, we're going to stay for a really solid amount of time. During that time, it's a great opportunity for you to start to sort of calibrate your touch sensitivity and get a feel for what happens the longer you stay with your pressure applied. Not only do you want to start to pay attention to the movement of air or the expansion and relaxation of the chest cavity, you want to start to feel that under your pressure, but you also want to, along with that, start to feel how the texture of the tissue starts to change the longer you pause in that one position. Usually associated with the exhalation or the relaxation of that chest cavity, you'll start to feel little by little a little bit more space or a little bit more relaxation of the tissue underneath your touch tool here each time they go through a breath cycle. That whole process and that gradual change in the texture of the musculature underneath your touch, that would be something that we could classify or group under this umbrella term of a release. So when someone says release a muscle with massage, that could be what they're referring to. That change in sensation and change in texture of the muscle underneath your touch. Having been here on this side now for a little while, we can start to release the pressure and head to the side that we started on for the second touch there. Adding in a slight change in hand position will come a little bit, about a centimeter of change towards the midline of the body. So moving in the direction of the sternum, we're still at about the same height, just below or just inferior to the clavicle there. And we're going to start to apply the pressure again, sinking in and feeling the resistance that gradually builds as we apply pressure. By the way, just making sure as you're working on the chest here with everyone that you've just got your fingers turned out to the side, and that will ensure that if you are working on anyone with breast tissue, that your fingers aren't encroaching on that tissue. Heading back to the second side again with the palm of the hand, we'll make the same small edit to our hand position, coming just slightly in towards the sternum, just slightly in towards the midline from where we made our first touch, and settle in and pause for what we will do as our final touch here with the palm before we move on to a different technique. But at home, if you feel the need to continue working with the palm of the hand, then go ahead and keep applying some more touch here with the palm of the hand before you then move on to a technique that we call the soft fist, which I'll show you in just a moment. To get the soft fist set up, all you need to do is just ball the hand into a fist and make sure that the fingertips are visible, so you're not tucking the fingertips under. which you can see demonstrated here nicely with this angle. And essentially we're applying the same type of weight. You might apply just a little bit less weight than you were with the palm of the hand here, just because the soft fist can be a little bit more intense as a result of the use of your knuckles. Of course, you can modify that based upon where exactly the pressure is being driven in your hand. If you do drive it more towards the knuckles, that leads to a little bit more intensity, whereas if you drive it a little bit more towards the flat portion of the fingers, then it's a little bit of a softer technique. From the first side, we head across to the second side, and in a similar way, we're working between that delta pectoral groove and the sternum. So somewhere in there, perhaps where you found an area of extra resistance with the palm of your hand, you can focus your time with your soft fist there. Something to keep in mind here is also that the chest can receive quite generous amounts of pressure, even though initially it might feel like an area of the body that's perhaps a little bit delicate or an area of the body that we might want to reduce our pressure on. It is an area that is very well designed to absorb a lot of pressure. The rib cage is specifically for absorbing and distributing force to protect the organs that are underneath the rib cage. And so with our pressure, we can build up gradually to transferring quite a generous amount of weight. Of course, do that in communication with the person that you're working on. It is very much up to them how much pressure they receive, but it might surprise you that they oftentimes will request a little bit more than what you think might be an ideal amount of pressure. So keep the lines of communication open and be ready to give a little bit more weight if they request it. Just like with the heel of the hand, when we repeat on each side, try to find a slightly different spot with the soft fist to settle into and try and identify small bands of tension that you can spend your time on. You can, of course, stay here a little bit longer, just like with the use of the palms. If you want to stay with soft fists for a little bit longer, please go ahead and do that. For now, I'm going to move on to the use of fingertips. I really like the use of fingertips to drive a little bit more focus into those small bands of tension and those trigger points that you found with the use of the palms and the use of the soft fists. So head on back to any bands or any points of extra tension that you might have found, that you might have felt extra resistance to your pressure with the previous techniques. Head back to those points and see if you can find them and direct a little bit of pointed pressure towards them. Try to use your fingertips as a team, so it's not just individual fingertips doing the work, it's a series of them in a row, and then stay until you feel that change in texture, that change in resistance of the musculature underneath your touch tool. If you weren't able to distinguish any of those bands or points of extra tension when you were using the other touch techniques, then usually you can find some of those points and bands with your fingertips if you just follow the clavicle line, so following just beneath, just inferior to the collarbone, and then heading towards what I would consider sort of the top corner where the sternum, the center of the chest, meets the collarbone. There's typically trigger points in and around there that you can spend quite a good amount of time on. You can also search systematically by starting to move inferiorly from the collarbone and travel in between the ribs. And also oftentimes in between those rib spaces, you'll typically find some extra points there. When you do find a spot, pause there, stay until you feel a change in the density of the tissue, and then continue to search from there. If you've still got more work to do on this side, please stay and do it. For now, I'm going to start to finish up and move to the second side, starting again just inferior to the collarbone and nice and close to the sternum. I'll begin my search, and from there I'll start to spread my attention a little bit further inferiorly in between the ribs, looking for those points of extra resistance. The continued search here is also quite important because just because you found one trigger point doesn't mean you found all of the trigger points. So after you've found one, after you've stayed there for plenty of time, keep in mind that there's usually more than one trigger point in an area, and so channel a little bit of your inner explorer and see if you can get to finding them. It might seem like we've spent a really long time here on the chest, And at the same time, pretty much always when we do this, the person that we're working on will say to you something along the lines of, wow, I didn't realize I needed so much time or so much attention on the chest. And so I think for pretty much everyone, this is time well spent because they will feel the results. They'll feel the benefits of having received plenty of time here on this area of the body. If the person that you're working on could really use some more time here, take that time, pause the video, keep going, keep finding what you can, and then resume. For now, we're going to release that pressure, sweep out from the center of the chest out towards the shoulders for a nice soothing finishing touch. You could probably spend an easy 10, if not 15 minutes there in the chest. Once you start to explore there, oftentimes you find more and more little treasures that could use some solid attention. Remember to take your time. Each time you find something, really give it some good time until you feel some kind of a change in either sensation on the receiving end or in the resistance that you feel in the tissue on the giving end. Once you have given, please make sure you switch it up and receive a little bit as well. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them below. And it'd be great if you could subscribe to the channel, and we'll get more content just like this out to you real soon.